as told by Daniel Weber, zoo volunteer and wildlife rescue specialist. I don't talk about that winter much. Not because it was the coldest one I've ever lived through, though it was. Not even because of the risks we took. I don't talk about it often because that was the winter that changed me. That was the winter I met Nanook. It started with a call. I was already 2 years into volunteering at the Northland Wildlife Refuge and Rehabilitation Center, located about 40 miles north of Churchill, Manitoba. Our team focused on Arctic rescue, primarily migratory birds and seals, but now and then we got polar bear calls, usually involving orphaned cubs or bears that had wandered too close to towns. But this call was different. Lone cub spotted near Point Resolution, came the voice through the radio. Estimated 2 days old, no sign of the mother. Coordinates transmitting now. I looked at Janice, the senior wildlife technician beside me, who had stopped mid-step. 2 days old? She echoed. Are they sure? No way a cub survives 2 days alone, I said, more to myself than anyone else. I grabbed my insulated suit from the hook. The snowmobile ride took about 2.5 hours, even in decent weather. The wind out there cuts like broken glass, and visibility drops with each mile away from town. But when we arrived, the report was confirmed. A small, helpless polar bear cub lay curled into a snowdrift like a dropped toy. He was still breathing, barely. Eyes not yet open. A pulse that felt too weak for life. We searched for signs of the mother. Tracks, blood, predator presence, anything. The ice told us nothing. One theory was that she'd been killed, either by a male polar bear or possibly during a fight with another female. Another possibility was abandonment due to weakness or sickness, a rare but not unheard of event in the wild when a mother senses something wrong with the cub. Whatever the case, that cub was alone. And out there, alone means dead. Janice and I wrapped him in thermal blankets and activated the warming pad we'd brought along, part of our emergency wildlife field kit. I tucked him inside my jacket and felt the faintest twitch of life. That twitch saved him. We named him Nanook that night. Back at the center, the team scrambled. A 2-day-old polar bear cub is smaller than most people imagine. Maybe 1.5 pounds, blind, covered in a thin layer of white fuzz. They're as helpless as human infants, maybe more so. The odds were against him. Many of our staff had seen cubs like this come in. Few had seen them survive. But Nanook was different. It started in small ways. He latched onto the feeding syringe on the second try. He maintained his body temperature, despite the initial risk of hypothermia. By the end of his first week, he'd gained 100 grams. His eyes opened after 10 days. And when he locked eyes with me for the first time, blinking slowly with pale, ice-blue irises, something cracked open in me. I think, honestly, it cracked open in all of us. For the first few weeks, he lived in a padded, heat-controlled enclosure modeled after a den. Only 4 of us were allowed to handle him directly. It was delicate work. I took the night shifts, partly because I volunteered, and partly because I couldn't stay away. He'd cry sometimes, a sound between a mewl and a whimper. I'd cradle him inside my parka, whispering soft nonsense while he kneaded my glove with tiny paws no bigger than a hamster's. He slept with a heartbeat simulator, something we used with abandoned fox kits and lynx cubs. It comforted him, reminded him of his mother's presence. But some nights, he ignored it, crawling instead toward my scent. The zoo took an interest quickly. Nanook, even in his earliest weeks, was unusually photogenic. When we finally released the first image, a shot of him nestled in a wool blanket with his snout half tucked and his paw up like a sleepy baby, public interest exploded. Emails flooded in, offers to sponsor his care. Children sent letters addressed simply, to Nanook the polar bear, Canada. We didn't ask for it, but Nanook had become a symbol, of resilience, of survival against odds, of a species on the brink but not yet broken. The media attention brought its own problems. Activist groups were divided. Some argued we should attempt to rewild him, despite the impossible odds. Others were outraged he hadn't been euthanized, fearing he'd become a tokenized zoo bear. But Nanook didn't care about any of that. He cared about warm bottles and soft blankets. He cared about the smell of milk and the sound of my voice. And slowly, he grew. By his 3rd month, Nanook had grown 5 times his birth weight. His legs grew sturdier. His claws came in sharp and curved. He began to waddle, then clumsily run. The first time he chased after a tennis ball, slipped, and did a somersault. Janice laughed so hard she nearly dropped her clipboard. We all fell for him. Not because he was cute, though, good lord, he was, but because we had watched every second of his fight to survive. He wasn't just an animal to us, he was a colleague, a brother, a child. By month 6, he had outgrown the nursery and moved to a larger habitat. It was an insulated pen designed to simulate Arctic conditions but softened for his still developing frame. Artificial snow, climbing blocks, shallow water for swimming. His coat thickened, and he took to the cold like he was born for it, which, of course, he was. During this time, Nanook started to vocalize more. Polar bear cubs make a surprising range of sounds: grunts, chirps, growls. When I came into his enclosure, he'd make a low humming noise, a sound our behaviorist said was recognition. We were bonded. Of course, we all knew what was coming next. As Nanook approached 1 year old, the decision had to be made about his future. The rehabilitation center, though equipped for rescue, wasn't equipped for long-term housing of a full-grown male polar bear. And release was out of the question. He had no survival skills. A bear raised by humans cannot be unraised. He'd become too used to us, too dependent. The best option was to transfer him to a world-class facility, a zoo that could provide space, enrichment, and contribute to polar bear conservation efforts through a breeding program. After careful vetting, we settled on the Marlow Zoological Institute in Ontario. Their Arctic exhibit was internationally acclaimed, with spacious enclosures, artificial tundra, and a proven record in polar bear welfare. Still, the day we prepared Nanook for transfer, my heart cracked again. I sat with him the night before he left. He was too big to curl in my lap anymore, but he leaned against me, head heavy on my thigh. I talked to him, nonsense, like always. "You did good, buddy," I whispered. "You beat the odds." He made that low humming sound, the one he saved just for me. The next morning, the team sedated him lightly and loaded him into the custom-built transport crate. It was secure, padded, temperature-controlled. A bear limousine, essentially. I walked beside the trailer until the road turned and they were gone. The center felt quieter after that. In the months that followed, I kept in touch with Marlow. Nanook adapted well. He loved the chilled pool, had taken to swimming long laps. He showed a particular fascination with floating logs and enrichment puzzles. The staff said he was unusually social, often calling out when keepers passed by. They kept him out of the public eye for the first few months, focusing on his development, his independence. But when they finally introduced him to the exhibit, the response was explosive. Lines formed daily to see him. Kids waved at him through the glass. And Nanook, my Nanook, thrived. But the story doesn't end there. Because Nanook's survival wasn't just a miracle, it was a message. His life began a new chapter in conservation. In partnership with the Marlow Institute, he became part of an international breeding program designed to preserve the polar bear gene pool and educate the public about the species' plight in the wild. And as he grew, so did his impact. But that's a story for another night. You'd think, after the transfer, I'd move on. That I'd pack up my Nanook memories, put them in a corner of my heart, and get back to the dozens of other rescues demanding attention. But some animals don't just pass through your life. They build a home in it. Nanook was one of them. I visited him for the first time 6 months after his relocation to the Marlow Zoological Institute. He was over 100 pounds heavier, broader in the shoulders, with a coat as white and plush as Arctic frost. Still, the moment he saw me, standing by the reinforced glass that lined one side of his habitat, he made that low, distinctive humming sound. Visitors around me turned, startled. "He's never done that before," a staff member said quietly beside me. We watched as Nanook approached, placing both massive paws on the glass, nose twitching against the pane like he was trying to figure out how to reach me. "It's Daniel," I said, not to Nanook, but to the keeper. I raised him. They let me in behind the scenes that day. I wasn't allowed direct contact anymore. He was a 500-pound adolescent male now, after all, but I got close. And in those minutes, standing just meters from him on the other side of a security gate, I saw that he remembered. He didn't act wild or aggressive. He paced near me, chuffed low sounds, sat down and looked right at me with those same blue eyes I remembered from the nursery. That's when I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to believe fully before. We hadn't just saved Nanook, he had saved something in all of us. Marlow Zoo had plans. Big ones. Nanook wasn't just an ambassador animal, drawing visitors through the turnstiles. He was now part of a coordinated global breeding effort under the Species Survival Plan, SSP. Polar bears, as most people know now, are in serious trouble. Their ice is melting, their food sources are harder to find, and cub survival in the wild has dropped steeply. The goal of the SSP was to maintain a genetically diverse, sustainable polar bear population in human care, with long-term hopes for rewilding or, at the very least, ensuring the species survived in the face of environmental collapse. Nanook's early genetic testing had revealed something unexpected. He carried a rare allele not commonly found in North American captive populations. That meant his genes were valuable. Scientists speculated he may have descended from a lesser-known subpopulation in the high Arctic, possibly the Viscount Melville Sound bears, a group known for their deep ice adaptation. This made him a key candidate for breeding. But first, he had to mature. The years passed. I continued to volunteer at the rescue center, but I visited Marlow Zoo every year, sometimes twice. Nanook grew into a stunning adult male. By age 4, he weighed nearly 1,000 pounds and stood over 10 feet tall when upright. But he wasn't just physically impressive, he was gentle with keepers, curious, intelligent. He solved enrichment puzzles faster than any other bear in their care. He had preferences, too. He loved salmon over trout, preferred female keepers to males, and absolutely adored the smell of eucalyptus oil. No one knows why. Then came Tala. She arrived in early spring, part of a carefully planned breeding transfer from a European facility. Tala was smaller, more cautious. She'd had a difficult start in life herself, rescued from an oil exploration site in Siberia as a cub. Their introduction was slow, weeks of shared scent, visual contact, and carefully monitored proximity. When they were finally allowed into the same enclosure, we all held our breath. Nanook approached her calmly, head low, posture relaxed. Tala puffed her cheeks, paced. Then, after a moment of tension, she nudged him with her snout. Just once. And the two began what looked like the most delicate dance I've ever seen between 2,000-pound predators. Over the next weeks, their bond grew. Keepers reported play sessions, tugging on logs, chasing each other in the snow, curling up near each other after swims. It wasn't just compatibility, it was affection. A year later, Tala gave birth to 2 cubs. I was in the middle of a rescue operation for an injured snowy owl when the call came through. Nanook's a father, Janice said, barely able to contain herself. 2 healthy cubs. 1 male, 1 female. I cried. Right there in the snow, gear still strapped to my back, owl crated beside me, I cried. The cubs were named Siku and Naya. From the start, they carried the best traits of both parents, playful, strong, and endlessly curious. They became instant celebrities. Marlow's visitor numbers doubled, but more importantly, Nanook's legacy had now multiplied. And yet, for me, this wasn't about legacy or headlines. It was about life. I returned that spring and watched from the observation room as Nanook, now fully grown and more majestic than I could have ever imagined, played gently with his cubs through the safety partition. Male polar bears in the wild rarely interact with offspring, but Nanook, shaped by humans, had a different rhythm. He didn't harm, didn't dominate. He watched. He seemed to understand. One of the keepers said something that stayed with me. "He's a bridge," she said, "between what we were and what we still might be." And she was right. In the following years, Nanook became central to education programs about climate change. Footage of his first days, rescued as a helpless cub, were shown to schoolchildren across Canada. His story was told in documentaries, in podcasts, in children's books. But none of those mediums could truly capture the feeling of standing in his presence. In 2024, the Marlow Institute hosted the International Arctic Wildlife Conference. Nanook was the centerpiece, not in a cage, but as an example. A life saved not just by human hands, but by commitment, science, and care. His keepers presented papers on bear enrichment, on captive breeding strategy, on behavior modeling. And I was asked to speak. It was the first time I told the full story in public, from the radio call on that freezing January morning to the night he leaned into my lap like a child. I ended with the words, "He was born on the ice and nearly died there. But Nanook didn't just survive. He became hope." I sat down to a standing ovation. Now, it's been more than 8 years since I first held Nanook in my arms. I'm older, slower, still at the rescue center, though mostly training now. Janice retired last year. We talk often. Nanook lives on, healthy, thriving, father of 4, symbol to thousands. His cubs are grown and may someday be parents themselves. And somewhere in the future, long after I'm gone, perhaps a descendant of Nanook will walk on Arctic ice once again, not alone, not abandoned, but wild and free. That's the dream we work for. That's why we save them. And every time